Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to show you how I painted this sunflower using watercolor, crayon dash, wax pencils, and some liquid paint pen. So let's get started. So I started with drawing on my cold press paper. This is B paper, and I'll have a link to the supplies in the description. So I just start by taping my paper to the table using washi tape. And the colors I'm using are quinacridone sienna, quinacridone gold, undersea green, and Naples yellow. So I'm spraying the paper with water and I'm using that sienna color. It's a really pretty transparent brownish red color, similar to burnt sienna, but much more transparent. And here I'm adding a little bit of that gold. And I'm adding it right over that outline. Typically with watercolors, you want to save the whites, but since we're going to do some opaque mixed media on top, I didn't worry about saving the whites or masking them off. Now I'm adding the undersea green, which is a granulating color, and I've never used this mixture of colors before, and it ended up being one of my favorite things about this painting, just that granulation of the green with the quinacridone sienna and gold. It just made really pretty variations in color, very natural and textured looking, and I just thought it turned out really pretty. And I did also use some water drops on there to create some extra texture. So this is where I'm experimenting, and it doesn't quite go according to plan. It's been a while since I've used a Posca pen, and even though it's an acrylic pen, I'm used to acrylic being permanent once you add it to the surface. But as you'll see in a moment, I made a mistake in that assumption, because once I added watercolor again, it lifted all of those lines. So I ended up going over it again later on after I added the next watercolor wash. But just for your reference, and here it is where I'm trying to apply some wet on wet here, and it's just smearing all that white. So just for your reference, don't do this white paint pen yet. What I would recommend is, if you have trouble seeing your lines, your pencil lines, after you do the first wash of watercolor, use a waterproof black pen. They have, I'll list it in the description. For some reason, I can't remember the name of the pens I use. Oh, Pigma Micron. Pigma Micron waterproof black pens. You can outline with that, and then you can not worry about your lines disappearing when you add your washes. So I would do the first layer of background color, then once that dried, add the pen, and then go in and do this step where I'm enhancing the colors. For these petals, I used some of that new gamboge color, and for the center, I used some of that perylene violet and orange color to make a nice mixed brown color. And now I'm using that sienna color on these back petals here, the ones in between the yellow, just to add some contrast and some interest in variation of color. So most of that white from the paint pen that I used has been lifted up, but some is still remaining. I'm not too concerned about that. I'm just going to go in and do another layer in the center there, a darker color. And I'm careful not to reactivate that white paint pen that's around the circle border. I'm just painting inside that line. Now here I'm using a little coarse sea salt here, just to add some extra texture in the middle, to see if that works. I haven't really used it on B paper before. B paper it's pretty affordable. It is a cotton paper. It doesn't perform as well as my preferred papers, which are Arches or Fabriano, but it is pretty good. I like it for some of the texture that you can get with it. But in terms of certain wet on wet techniques and things of that nature, it doesn't perform quite as well, and it turned out the salt worked okay, but not great. But again, this is all just an experimental piece, so I definitely learned some things, and hopefully you can learn just from watching what not to do. So again, I am rewetting the background so I can add a little bit more contrast behind the flower petals. I'm using that undersea green again. And I'm just letting it flow into the wet paper. A little bit of the green and a little bit of the sienna and the green and the sienna, and just letting them mix on the paper, and a little bit of the quinacridone gold as well. I'm not recovering everything. I'm doing a pretty light layer, especially down there below the leaves. I just want most of the contrast behind those petals. Now everything is dry, and I'm coming in with my water-soluble wax pencils by Neocolor. And they're nice and opaque, and they activate with water, so they're sort of like the texture of a pastel, but once you add water, they activate, and they're like a gouache with their opacity. So I'm using yellow and white. I'm using white towards the tips and then yellow below that, with a little bit of a gap to make it look like some of the darker veins are remaining down the petals. And each time I use my brush, it's just a little bit wet, mostly just damp, just enough to move that pigment. I don't want to flood the area with a lot of water. I just want a damp brush to push the pigment, and I use my paper towel to wipe off the excess pigment in between each petal, or in between each couple of petals. Now I'm using a brown crayon to emphasize more of those veins in the petal and darken some of those areas behind. And I'm using my small brush to do some blending. Okay, now I'm going to remove the salt, and like I said earlier, it kind of worked, but it didn't really do a lot in terms of the texture that I was hoping it would. All right, back to the Caran d'Ache pencils, adding some veins on the leaves and slightly softening those lines there with my damp brush. And adding a few highlights inside the center of the sunflower using a deep yellow color. I tried the brown, but I did not like that. I tried the purple, and I definitely didn't like that. So back to the brown. And I could have used my brush and lifted it all away if I needed to, but it didn't seem like it seemed that brown covered those purple spots enough that I didn't need to worry about that. So again, using my brush just to soften some of those areas, blend them out a little bit. Okay, now I can go back to my paint pen. And I'm just going to fix those areas that got messed up with the subsequent layers of watery paint. In the end, I was pretty happy with how it turned out. I definitely learned some things about order of operations, and I look forward to doing something similar and saving the paint pen for last. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up, and if you want to see more watercolor and other painting tutorials, consider subscribing to my channel. And the more that you like and subscribe, the further I can reach others who are just learning how to paint watercolors, and it really helps my small channel. So again, thank you for joining, and if you have any suggestions for future tutorials or any questions about art or watercolor painting in general, please feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below. Also, I almost forgot to let you know, I do have a free techniques e-guide available on my website. All you have to do is go to createwithora.com/free, and you will get a free guide and an accompanying video that you can watch, and it's completely free. So I hope you go to my website and check it out. Thanks again for joining me. I'll see you next time. Bye.